Today, we're diving into one of the most important topics for beginner woodworkers, mistakes. Now, we all make them, but I'm here today to help you avoid some of the most common ones, save you some time, some money, and some frustration. So let's get right into it. All right, so this one's obvious, but it's incredibly important. Measuring correctly. It's so easy to rush the process sometimes, especially if you've measured something 100 different times, but even a slight miscalculation can result in parts that just don't fit. Always measure at least twice to make sure that you've got it right. And once you've done that, make sure that you know which part of the material that you're going to keep and which part's to scrap. It's so frustrating to make a cut and then realize that you've cut on the wrong side of the line and now your piece is a 1/16 of an inch too short. Another pro tip is to make sure that you use a fine pencil or a marking knife for more accuracy. The thicker that line is, the more room that you've got for error. A few months back, I cut out all the parts for multiple cabinet doors, and when I finished, I realized that my miter saw was set on 1 degree and not 0. I was absolutely sick. The time before, when I had used my saw, I had to put this slight angle on one end of a project, and then I forgot to set it back. So whether it's a table saw, a miter saw, or even a circular saw, it's critical to check the accuracy before making cuts. Also, make sure that your blade is perfectly square to the table or fence. Angle gauges like this one here from Klein make this process very simple because they're magnetic, so you can zero it out with the base and then you stick it on the blade and you can adjust it and line everything up. I recommend doing a quick check before each project to avoid those frustrating small errors that will build up over time. Now let's talk about the blade kerf, which is the thickness of the saw blade itself. It's basically what the blade takes out of the material. That's a good example there. A lot of beginners don't realize this, that it can affect your measurements a lot. If you don't account for the kerf, your piece will definitely end up too short. I run full kerf blades on my saws, so that's 1/8 of an inch, and that's extremely noticeable if you don't factor it into your equation. The blade kerf for a lot of other saws, if you're going to go even with a thin kerf, is still a 1/16 of an inch, and that will add up over time, and so you've really got to factor that in. Now, this is one of the more advanced mistakes that beginners often overlook: failing to plan for wood movement. Wood expands and contracts with changes in humidity and temperature. If your design doesn't allow for this natural movement, it can warp, crack, or even break over time. Now, when I build things like tabletops, I love using these little figure-8 fasteners. That's all they are. They're very cheap and they're very simple. You take one end of this and you basically recess it down into the cabinet, and then you put a screw into it that direction. And then when you set your tabletop down on top, you run a screw up through this direction, and it still allows for any kind of movement that may try to still happen. It will kind of pivot and allow for that movement. It's something that really needs to be thought about when you're doing any kind of building, because it is the difference in having a project that works out well and one that may end up something cracking, busting, or splitting. This one is a classic: skipping the sanding between coats. Now, I get it, you're eager to finish the project, but sanding between coats of stain, paint, or varnish is crucial. Skipping this step can leave you with an uneven finish, but the real problem is that it leaves you rough spots, usually caused by dust nibs or the grain raising up slightly when the finish is applied. I often get asked about how our projects look so clean and sharp when they're finished, and honestly, sanding between the coats plays a big part in that. Between each coat, a light sanding with fine grit sandpaper, I usually like to use a 400 grit sandpaper, helps the next layer adhere better and smooths out imperfections. It's the difference between a professional looking finish and something that was rushed. A tape measure is a great tool, but when you're cutting multiple pieces to the same length, relying on it for every measurement can lead to slight variances. A better option for repeat cuts is a stop block. By using a stop block, you're not introducing potential errors each time that you pull out the tape measure. It's a simple hack that saves time and ensures actual precision, especially when you're building cabinets or furniture with multiple identical parts. Repeatability is always key. It probably doesn't matter that your coffee table legs are 18 inches or 17 7/8, but what really matters is that they're all the same. Here's a big one: rushing the drying process. Whether it's glue, stain, or finish, it's tempting to move ahead before everything's fully dry. But doing that can seriously compromise the strength of your project. Wood glue, for example, needs proper clamping time to cure and create strong joints. Rushing this can lead to weak joints that break under pressure. Always follow the manufacturer's instructions and give it the time that it needs. Also remember that temperature and humidity will usually always impact the time that it takes to dry as well. A climate-controlled shop with lower humidity will always dry faster than drying outside on a humid July afternoon. Now, before you break out the glue or screws, it's important to dry fit your pieces first. That means assembling everything without any fasteners to make sure that it all fits properly. Now, this step allows you to catch any errors before they become permanent. Sometimes something might be off by just a hair, and catching that during a dry fit can save you from having to redo an entire assembly. I find this to be especially important when building cabinet doors. Verifying that the center panels, the rails, the stiles, and everything are all fitting together as expected is always better than starting off gluing everything up, only to realize that the panels are a little bit too big. Not pre-drilling holes is another common beginner mistake, especially with hardwoods. When you drive screws directly into wood without a pilot hole, the wood can split and it can ruin your project. By pre-drilling, you allow the screw to go in more easily without putting excess pressure on the wood. It's a simple step that makes a big difference in the quality and the durability of your finished piece. I also like to countersink anything that I can as well to help lower the screw heads below the surface. Most of the time, this is achieved by using a countersink bit that also has a pilot bit attached to it, like this one here from Amana. Now, this one kind of is a 2-in-1. We have the countersink bit here, we've got a pilot bit here, and this is a great bit. This is actually my favorite countersink bit. It's a little bit pricey. I want to say it's around 40 or 45 bucks, but it's the best one that I've found so far. I'll put a link in the description if you're interested. I also really like using a self-centering drill bit. Now, this one here actually is kind of a 2-for-1 as well. We have a self-centering piece here, and a self-centering drill bit is basically spring-loaded, and it works good for anything that already has like a hole, like say you're going to install some hinges and you want to put those screws in. This works great for that, and you're able to use this type of bit. This is from Montana Tools, but basically this is a quick clip, so I can pre-drill here with this self-centering bit, and then I can flip it over, and I've got a Phillips head bit over here. So it allows me to do everything with just one tool. Another mistake beginners make is using the wrong type of wood for their projects. Different woods have different properties. For example, softwoods like pine are often easier to work with, and they're great for beginner projects, but they might not be great, and they might not hold up well as an heirloom piece that you want to pass down for generations. On the other hand, hardwood like oak, well, they're beautiful and they're strong, but they can be a little bit more difficult to work with. And then, of course, to complicate matters worse, there are times when a hardwood like oak wouldn't be a good option. Cutting boards, for example, need to be made from hardwoods, but they need to be closed grain hardwoods to help prevent bacteria buildup. Since red oak is a very open grain wood, you'd want to avoid it and try something like maple, cherry, or walnut. These same rules apply for sheet goods. I'm not really a fan of using MDF for cabinetry, but it's almost unbeatable as a center panel for a shaker door that's going to be painted. But for the carcass of the cabinet, you're going to want to use a good cabinet grade maple or birch plywood. So understanding the strengths and the weaknesses of each wood will help you choose the right material for your project and ensure that it turns out exactly as you expect. Now, if you'd like to learn a little bit more about plywood and then picking the right plywood, then this video right here will tell you everything you need to know.